Chinese products have always had a reputation for being trash. But guess what? Now even their weapons have proven to be junk. They failed Pakistan, Myanmar, and almost everywhere else that they've been sold, including, most recently, in Iran. You see, for the last 2 decades, China's defense industry has grown rapidly and flooded the markets across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Most buyers were countries that couldn't afford Western weapons or were blocked by political barriers like sanctions and embargoes. Nations like Iran and Pakistan had little choice but to rely heavily on Chinese weapons. Iran, for example, has faced severe Western sanctions, especially from the US, ever since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Before that, Iran's military mostly relied on advanced American and European equipment. It even had some of the top-tier US fighter jets like the F-14 Tomcat. But after 1979, when relations with the West collapsed practically overnight, Tehran had almost nowhere else to turn. Sure, Russia was an option, but Iranian leaders never fully trusted Moscow, and Russian weapons were often expensive and far from reliable. China stepped into this gap and consistently undercut Russian prices while claiming to offer equal or even superior technology. As a result, Tehran found itself heavily dependent on Chinese arms for decades. Pakistan's story is quite similar. Before the 1990s, Pakistan was largely equipped with American and Western gear, especially during the Cold War when it served as a key US ally against Soviet influence in Afghanistan. But everything changed after Pakistan's nuclear tests in 1998. The US immediately slapped harsh sanctions, cutting off military supplies almost overnight. With nowhere else to go, Pakistan doubled down on its friendship with China, which happily flooded Islamabad with affordable fighter jets, tanks, missiles, and Navy vessels, quickly becoming Pakistan's main and practically only supplier of military hardware. Moreover, China has consistently produced impressive weapon systems over the decades, often showing off each as groundbreaking, and sometimes even boldly claiming them to be far superior to Western technology. For example, back in the 1990s and the 2000s, China heavily promoted advanced missile technology and its indigenous fighter jets like the JF-17 Thunder, which quickly became Pakistan's frontline aircraft. By the 2010s, China unveiled the stealthy J-20 fighter jet, boldly claiming it could easily match or even outperform American jets like the F-22 and the F-35. Around the same time, new anti-ship missiles, precision-guided bombs, and high-tech radar systems made regular headlines, always promising Western-level performance at a fraction of the cost. This created an illusion that Chinese technology was just as good as Western military hardware, making Chinese weapons highly appealing to countries like Iran and Pakistan, both desperate for advanced arms but unable to afford or access Western options. After spending tens of billions of dollars, these countries confidently believed they now had cutting-edge arsenals, powerful enough to defend themselves or even challenge adversaries like Israel and India. But as you'll soon see, all they really bought was a collection of expensive junk. In this video, we'll show you exactly how these Temu-grade weapons collapsed like a house of cards in real-world battles, how China's defense technology is nearly all stolen, and how 2025 is the beginning of the end for Beijing's military ambitions. Now, this video is definitely not advertiser-friendly according to the YouTube algorithm, and this is why we need your help. YouTube has a habit of restricting videos that talk about war, but this is the reality of the world we live in. So if you can do us a big favor and hit that like and subscribe button down below, it helps out the video tremendously. We appreciate you. The best example to start with is Iran. If you're into geopolitics like us, you probably know that tensions between Iran and Israel have simmered dangerously for decades, mostly due to Iran's nuclear ambitions and its support for militant proxies like Hezbollah. In early of 2025, after years of covert operations and escalating hostility, these tensions finally erupted into open warfare. In the early hours of June 13, 2025, Israel launched a massive preemptive strike designed to completely disable Iran's military capabilities in one swift move. Under the cover of darkness, advanced Israeli F-35I stealth jets slipped quietly into Iranian airspace, easily taking out critical air defense systems like the Russian-made S-300. Some rumors even say they targeted the Chinese JY-10 anti-air command control system and C-802 missile systems, a radar that's supposed to track 100 targets at once across an 800-kilometer radius. But guess what? It didn't even work to track a single jet, let alone fire missiles in retaliation. Within minutes, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, HARMs, slammed into every intended Iranian radar station. With their radars' eyes knocked out, Iranian missile crews suddenly found themselves blind and helpless. Right behind those Israeli F-35 jets, came dozens of Israeli F-15I Stryker jets and F-16I jets, each armed with precision-guided bombs and missiles. In the next few hours, these jets and drones systematically took out Iran's military commanders, nuclear scientists, missile sites, radar installations, and pretty much every important target they had planned for. This humiliating collapse was exactly when China's propaganda machine sprang into action, desperately trying to limit the damage to its reputation. Official Chinese media and affiliated websites immediately began posting outrageous claims, like boasting an 80% success rate for their air defense systems in Iran. But in reality, many of these systems were obliterated into dust before they could even track anything at all. And similar to how Pakistani and Chinese accounts falsely bragged about shooting down multiple Indian Rafale jets just months earlier, during their May 2025 clash, which we'll get into shortly, they did the same thing with Iran. Chinese accounts immediately began boasting they'd taken down multiple Israeli F-35I stealth jets, along with several F-16s. This particular image went viral, but it's clearly fake. Apart from these AI-generated images, they've provided absolutely no physical proof, not even now, a full week after the ceasefire. Instead of relying on the billion-dollar state-of-the-art defense systems Iran bought from China, the Iranian army resorted to desperately firing anti-aircraft guns into the sky as their only remaining measure, something that, as you can guess, yielded no real results. By dawn, Israel had accomplished in just a few hours what they assumed would take days of intense fighting. Iranian political leaders, at least those still alive after Israel's strikes, were in complete shock. An Iranian military officer, speaking anonymously to a foreign outlet, reportedly admitted their air defense systems were supposed to be cutting edge, but turned out to be advanced only for display, not for actual combat. You'd think Iran would be furious with China after this humiliation, right? But it turns out Tehran might be even dumber than we thought. Recent reports indicate that Iran plans to spend tens of billions of dollars more to rebuild its air force. And guess where they're shopping? China. Just days after the US military's recent weekend airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, a group of senior Iranian military officials flew directly to China. While there, they reportedly expressed serious interest in buying advanced Chinese military aircraft, specifically the J-10C, a so-called fourth-generation warplane. Right now, Iran desperately needs to restore its shattered air defenses and regain the ability to project power in the critical air domain, which, by the way, it never had in the first place, and with Chinese weapons, it'll never have it. At least not if they're still planning on buying weapons from China. And with no chance of striking a favorable deal with the US, Iran sees China as the only realistic option left. Initially, Iran wished to buy Russian fighter jets, but the Kremlin simply isn't selling. Moscow needs every single warplane it has for its ongoing war in Ukraine. Plus, like I said earlier, prices matter. And Chinese aircraft are much cheaper and seemingly more affordable than Russian Su-35s, making them far more attractive despite their poor combat record. What's crazy, and perhaps the most absurd reason why Iran is still willing to trust Chinese weapons, is because of the so-called success of Chinese jets in the recent 4-day war between India and Pakistan. Most people don't realize this, but most of the news coming out of the India conflict was fueled by intense Chinese propaganda. Chinese claims were so convincing that they even impacted the stock price of Dassault, the Chinese manufacturer of Rafale fighter jets. According to the Chinese narrative, Pakistan's military supposedly achieved spectacular victories against India's far superior air force, largely thanks to Chinese-made jets like the J-10C. They claimed Pakistani pilots downed multiple advanced French-built Rafale fighters, a claim that's been thoroughly debunked by independent reports. And just days after boasting about the fake victories over Indian jets, Chinese state media even released a 2-part documentary celebrating the development of the J-10C fighter jet. It's still airing on National Memory, a daily program dedicated to glorifying the Communist Party's history. But to be fair, Iran's interest in the J-10C fighter jet actually goes back nearly 2 decades. In 2015, Tehran nearly signed a huge deal to buy 150 of these jets, but negotiations stalled. China demanded payment in foreign currency, while Tehran, due to a shortage, offered barter payments in oil and gas. The deal was further blocked by the UN arms embargo on Iran at the time. But then things changed in 2020, when the embargo was finally lifted, allowing negotiations to resume, though now for a much smaller order of just 36 jets. Even then, disputes over payment methods persisted. But now, a barter trade looks highly likely, especially since China's energy demands are the highest in the world. And with the US officially permitting China to buy Iranian oil without sanctions as of June 24, 2025, Iran's biggest obstacle is gone, and it finally has the green light to buy the jets it has wanted for years. And rest assured, Iran will still buy every single piece of Chinese equipment it can get its hands on, despite the humiliating disaster just days ago. By the way, China still hasn't accepted any blame for the failures in Iran. Instead, it's conveniently blaming the only other arms supplier involved, the Russians. Chinese state-affiliated media even went as far as blaming Iran's Russian S-300 missile batteries, claiming the outcome could have been different if Tehran had relied more heavily on Chinese systems. But that's nonsense, because the Chinese-made radars were supposed to be the very first step in Iran's air defense network, responsible for detecting incoming threats and then passing targeting data to Chinese-made C-802 missile systems. But those Chinese radars never even turned on. To this, some Chinese social media users claimed that if Chinese personnel had operated Iran's air defenses, the outcome could have been entirely different. But to be honest, even the Chinese were shocked by how badly their weapons performed in Iran. Given the strategic partnership between China and Iran, something had to be done quickly to fix this embarrassment. Iran desperately hoped China would step up openly to support it, but Beijing chose a more secretive path instead. On June 14th, while Israel was still pounding targets across Iranian territory, at least 5 Boeing 747 cargo jets took off from various locations in China and flew a discrete path westward, passing through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, before suddenly disappearing from radar screens as they reached Iranian airspace. Officially, these flights listed Luxembourg as their destination, but none of them ever entered European airspace. And what makes these mysterious disappearances significant is that Boeing 747 cargo planes are regularly used to transport military equipment, and historically, China has a track record of secretly providing military aid to anti-Western countries and proxies. So helping Iran fits perfectly with Beijing's broader geopolitical ambitions. Both countries openly oppose a US-led global order and advocate for a multipolar world. Also, given that nearly every Chinese weapon system in Iran failed spectacularly, these covert shipments might have been China's discreet attempt to patch things up with Tehran, to prevent an embarrassing weapons disaster from completely ruining their strategic relationship. Some intelligence reports even indicate China might have provided Iran with ballistic missile materials. Of course, doing so openly is illegal under international law, and could place Beijing directly in the crosshairs of US sanctions. That's precisely why these cargo flights went dark near Iranian airspace. Turning off their radar trackers ensured plausible deniability. Luxembourg-based airline Cargolux, whose planes were initially linked to these flights, firmly denied any involvement, officially stating on its website and social media that none of its flights utilize Iranian airspace. Now, this might surprise you, but Iran could have literally avoided the embarrassment of its catastrophic air defense failure if it had simply paid attention to what happened in Pakistan just a few weeks earlier, which also involved plenty of Chinese weaponry. After the brutal terrorist attack in the Indian town of Pahalgam, which killed 26 innocent civilians, including women and foreign tourists, India vowed immediate revenge. Investigators quickly traced the attackers back to militant groups based inside of Pakistan, sparking widespread outrage across India. Within days, the Indian military launched a rapid retaliatory strike known as Operation Sindoor, targeting terrorist camps along the Pakistani military installations that supported them. What made Operation Sindoor so significant, especially to Western military analysts, was that India's missiles and aircraft had to penetrate Pakistan's Chinese-supplied air defenses. And to everyone's surprise, they did so with ease. You see, as of today, around 80% of Pakistan's major military hardware comes straight from China. This includes the jointly developed JF-17 Thunder fighter jets, recently acquired J-10CE fighters, as well as Chinese-made attack drones, tanks, warships, and a broad array of sophisticated air defense equipment. To guard its airspace, Pakistan also bought China's HQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile system. Beijing loves claiming this system is just as good as America's Patriot or Russia's S-300. The HQ-9 version sold to Pakistan, the HQ-9P, supposedly has a range of about 125 kilometers, while upgraded and newer variants like the HQ-9B could reach targets 250 to 300 kilometers away. According to Chinese marketing, each HQ-9 battery includes search radars, tracking radars, passive electronically scanned arrays, command vehicles, and multiple missile launchers. One battery can deploy up to 48 launch vessels, holding a total of 192 missiles. It's advertised as capable of intercepting everything from fighter jets and drones to cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Pakistan even integrated the HQ-9 into a broader air defense network called CLIAD, Comprehensive Layered Integrated Air Defense. This network also included medium-range HQ-16 missiles, short-range HQ-7 and FM-90 launchers, and FN-6 portable missile units. On paper, these Chinese weapons created a high-tech defensive barrier around Pakistan, or at least that was Xi Jinping's promise. But in reality, when Indian missiles and drones actually struck Pakistan, the Chinese systems collapsed like a house of cards. In the early morning of May 8, 2025, just 15 days after the massacre at Pahalgam, the Indian military launched a swift, coordinated strike across multiple locations inside of Pakistan. According to official Indian statements, the entire operation lasted roughly 25 minutes. Yet, in that short time, Indian forces successfully hit at least 9 major targets, completely catching Pakistan off guard. Their primary targets included the training camps and headquarters of militant groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed (JEM) and Lashkar-e-Taiba (LET), the groups India held responsible for the terror attack in Kashmir. One of the most critical early hits was the Chunian Air Base near Lahore, where Pakistan had deployed its Chinese-made YLC-8E anti-stealth radar. Indian jets fired a barrage of anti-radiation missiles directly at the radar, knocked it out, and instantly disabled a key piece of the Pakistani air defense network. At the same moment, other Indian units were already targeting Pakistan's HQ-9 missile batteries stationed near major cities and military bases. Indian army units had secretly deployed BrahMos cruise missiles along the border days earlier, and when ordered, these missiles flew low, close to the ground, directly toward HQ-9 batteries protecting strategic locations like Lahore. Just like Iran would do weeks later, Pakistani forces scrambled to fire back using short-range missiles and anti-aircraft guns. But nothing they did worked. Not a single incoming Indian missile was shot down. Other Indian reports later stated every missile struck exactly where it was supposed to, and independent assessments found absolutely no evidence to contradict that. By the time the Pakistani fighter jets, including the American-built F-16s and Chinese J-10CEs, finally scrambled into the air, Indian forces had already completed their mission and started to withdraw. When the dust finally settled, India announced it had successfully achieved all of its objectives. Several terrorist camps were wiped out, dozens of high-profile militant leaders eliminated, and the strikes were carefully limited, meant to only punish terrorists, not start a full-scale war. To back these claims, India also released drone footage of targets being hit with pinpoint accuracy. On the other hand, Pakistan initially tried to deny or downplay the damage, claiming their military was alert and that losses were minimal. Both China and Pakistan had one significant advantage, not on the battlefield but in information warfare. State-driven Chinese propaganda was so intense that not only did it drive down the stock price of Dassault Aviation, but it also pushed Chinese defense stocks by nearly 36%. But as more independent evidence surfaced, and especially once Pakistan's own military leaders admitted their Chinese-supplied defenses hadn't performed as promised, Chinese defense stocks immediately started collapsing. After the ceasefire on May 13th, the Aerospace and Defense Index quickly plunged about 8 to 9%, wiping billions off the market virtually overnight. AVIC Chengdu Aircraft, manufacturer of Pakistan's J-10 and J-17 jets, saw its share price drop from about 95.86 yuan on May 12th to 76.70 yuan just 2 weeks later, losing over 20%. Zhuzhou Hongda Electronics, which supplies Pakistan with advanced missiles like the PL-15, also suffered losses of roughly 6 to 9% in the same period. Ironically though, instead of Pakistan growing angry with China for the weapon's poor performance, the opposite happened. Beijing became furious with Islamabad. Chinese analysts blamed Pakistan's military personnel, claiming their inadequate training and poor handling had caused the failure, not flaws in the Chinese weapons themselves. Clearly, the disastrous performance of their systems had deeply embarrassed China in front of the entire world. In fact, Beijing even pressured Islamabad to hide or destroy all evidence of the Chinese equipment's failures, terrified that these failures would severely damage China's reputation and its lucrative defense export business. But the damage was already done. No amount of blame shifting could hide the obvious, and Iran should have taken notes as a precaution, but you now know how that went. Now, the real problem for China is that the same radars and missile systems that failed so spectacularly in Pakistan are also used by China's own military. For example, a JY-27 radar, the same type destroyed easily by Indian forces, is deployed by the PLA near Pongong Tso Lake in eastern Ladakh, directly opposite Indian positions along the Himalayan border. India already knows exactly how to neutralize these Chinese threats, and they've demonstrated this clearly. Not just in 2025, but as early as 2019 and again in 2022. Back in February of 2019, after the Pulwama terror attack, Indian Mirage fighter jets penetrated Pakistani airspace undetected, striking a Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist camp in Balakot. Pakistan's Chinese-supplied radars completely failed to detect or intercept the jets in time, allowing the Indian Air Force to hit their targets and return safely. This was the first major sign that Pakistan's China-sourced air defenses had serious weaknesses. But Islamabad didn't learn its lesson and continued buying even more Chinese equipment, hoping things would improve. They didn't. In fact, just 3 years later, in March of 2022, an unarmed Indian BrahMos cruise missile accidentally flew deep into Pakistani territory, reportedly due to a technical error, though some suspect India deliberately tested Pakistan's defenses. Initially, Pakistan insisted its Chinese-made radars tracked the missile all the way from launch to impact, but this only raised bigger questions. If the radars worked, why didn't Pakistan make any attempt to shoot the missile down? Did the systems even spot the missile in the first place? These incidents were massive red flags that Pakistan's expensive Chinese radar and missile systems were riddled with blind spots and operational failures. And that's precisely what India exploited during Operation Sindoor in 2025, just like Israel would exploit the same weaknesses in Iran. So, if a direct conflict between India and China ever erupts along the Himalayan border, we'll finally see firsthand whether Chinese radars and missiles are truly useless, or if it's just poor training and incompetence by soldiers operating them. Now this brings us to the most important question. Why exactly did Chinese weaponry fail so badly when it mattered the most? Well, it boils down to a few key factors, like stolen designs, poor quality control, corruption, and a lack of real-world combat experience. Now, like I said at the start, most of the Chinese weapons are essentially copies or hybrids of foreign designs. Instead of investing years and billions into research and development from scratch, China often steals or copies foreign designs, especially from the US and Russia, then just reverse engineers them for mass production. First, it takes China years to steal highly classified military technology, and then several more years to study and reverse engineer it. Because of this slow and inefficient process, most Chinese gear is already outdated by the time it's deployed. And even then, they often struggle to properly copy and replicate it because they suck at reverse engineering. Just because China can build something similar doesn't mean it works equally well. Take, for instance, the HQ-9 long-range missile systems that failed spectacularly in Pakistan. China proudly claimed this system could rival Russia's S-300 and America's Patriot missile defenses. But guess why they made that comparison? Because the HQ-9 is literally built from stolen designs of the Russian S-300, with some components borrowed from the Patriot as well. But the problem is that weapons like the S-300 and the Patriot are built on complex coding, years of testing, precision integration, and constant refinement, things that China has struggled badly to replicate. And that's precisely why their equipment often fails to function correctly in real combat scenarios. The same goes for almost every major Chinese weapons platform. For example, the J-11 fighter jet is basically a licensed-built Russian Sukhoi Su-27. When the licensing deal with Russia expired, China kept building it anyway, without Russian permission. They simply copied the existing design, but struggled badly when trying to improve or further upgrade it. Then there's China's carrier-based jet, the J-15. Chinese engineers literally reverse engineered it from a single prototype of Russia's Su-33 jet that they secretly bought from Ukraine. However, copying an aircraft from the late 1980s didn't turn out to be as simple as they thought. The Chinese struggled for years to fix serious structural and technical problems, resulting in a fighter jet that was overweight, unreliable, and accident-prone, earning itself a pretty embarrassing reputation. Chinese drones like the Wing Long series and the CH-4 Rainbow look almost exactly like American MQ-1 Predator and MQ-9 Reaper drones. And it's pretty clear where they got their ideas. Initially, many countries were excited to buy these cheaper Chinese drones as replacements for expensive American ones, but they soon discovered serious problems. Iraq, for example, bought several CH-4B drones but quickly ran into major maintenance issues. By 2019, only one drone out of about 10 remained fully operational. Jordan faced similar issues with its CH-4Bs. After just a few years, they were so disappointed with performance and reliability that they grounded the drones entirely and tried selling them off. And it's not just aircraft and drones. The same problems extend to nearly all of China's tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, and missiles. For example, China's early main battle tanks, like the Type 59 and Type 69, were essentially modified versions of old Soviet T-54s and T-55s. Even newer models, such as the Type 99, borrow heavily from Russian tank designs and use technology copied from Western systems, often poorly integrated. It's the same story with China's artillery systems and rocket launchers. The Chinese PHL-03 multiple rocket launcher, for instance, was directly copied from Russia's BM-30 Smerch rocket system. They basically took the original Russian design, renamed it, and produced it without significant improvements. This history of constant stealing and copying means Chinese weapons rarely start at the leading edge. Instead, they're always one step behind, trying to catch up. Simply cloning advanced technology isn't enough. Precision engineering, rigorous testing, refinement, and integration of complex subsystems are critical to a weapon's real-world performance. Things Chinese weapons usually miss out on. And as recent failures in Iran and Pakistan have clearly demonstrated, when these copied weapons face the stress of real combat, they collapse completely. They might look impressive on paper or in propaganda videos, but without fully mastering their complexity, China's cloned weapons are nothing but expensive junk. And this brings us to the other reason why Chinese systems fail: corruption and poor quality control. You see, even if China manages to get some things right through copying, corruption inside the system often ruins whatever progress they've made. The most shocking example came to light in late 2023, when US intelligence reports revealed that some of China's own strategic missiles were literally filled with water instead of rocket fuel. Yes, plain water. Even worse, the Americans reported finding entire missile silo fields fitted with defective lids that would have prevented the missiles from launching properly in a crisis. Imagine how bad things must be internally if strategic weapons, crucial to China's security, are sabotaged by corruption and carelessness. This scandal was so huge that Chinese President Xi Jinping himself had to step in. He fired, or quote-unquote disciplined, dozens of senior military leaders, including commanders of the elite rocket force responsible for strategic missiles. Even China's defense minister, General Li Shangfu, a key figure in military procurement, was removed from office and disappeared from public view in October of 2023. These actions made it clear just how deep and widespread corruption had become within China's military ranks. In fact, US analysts believed these discoveries rattled Xi's trust in his own military so deeply that China might be reluctant to take aggressive military actions in the near future, because now they couldn't even be sure their advanced missiles and radars would actually work if they were needed. And corruption isn't the only issue. Poor manufacturing standards have consistently plagued Chinese weapons. Foreign buyers have repeatedly reported severe quality problems. Engines often fail before their promised lifespan, electronics malfunction unexpectedly, or even armor panels simply fall off of vehicles. For example, Pakistan's Air Force pilots have admitted that their Chinese-built JF-17 fighter jets require far more maintenance and repairs than the older American-made F-16s they fly alongside. Early batches of Chinese fighter jets delivered to other countries also showed abnormally high crash rates, another red flag. Now, if China's own critical strategic missiles were found filled with water, imagine the actual quality of weapons it exports to other countries. The only reason China has managed to cover these issues for so long is that it hasn't fought a major war in over 4 decades. Their weapons haven't been properly battle-tested. Western systems, and even Russian ones to some extent, have consistently seen real-world combat. For instance, while Russian-made S-300 and S-400 air defense systems in Syria haven't completely stopped Israeli airstrikes, they've still managed some limited success. Historically, even outdated air defenses occasionally score a lucky shot. For example, a 1960s-era Serbian missile system famously shot down a US stealth F-117 Nighthawk during the 1999 Kosovo War. In contrast, the Chinese-supplied radars and missiles in Iran and Pakistan didn't even manage one lucky hit, which shows how poorly these weapons actually perform. But then, why do Iranian and Pakistani leaders still insist on buying Chinese weapons despite repeated failures? Well, it's simple. Corruption runs deep in the buying countries as well. Chinese arms deals often come bundled with generous loans or diplomatic favors, such as investments through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, making these deals very attractive to cash-strapped governments and lucrative for their politicians as well. For China, the stakes are now higher than ever. Beijing has ambitions to not just be a regional power, but a global one. And a big part of that strategy is arms exports and the reputation of its military technology. China is already the world's 4th largest arms exporter, but recent events have severely damaged their credibility. After seeing their weapons fail disastrously in actual combat, potential buyers may now think twice. The damage also hits home domestically. President Xi constantly boasts about building a world-class military by mid-century, making military strength a central pillar of Chinese national pride. Humiliating failures in Pakistan and Iran, combined with embarrassing corruption scandals, like missiles literally filled with water, directly undermines Xi's narrative within China itself. Looking ahead, China will surely claim it's learning from these embarrassing incidents, but considering their track record, meaningful improvements seem unlikely anytime soon. If China genuinely wanted to build reliable, battle-tested weapons, it absolutely has the resources to do it. But realistically, they probably won't make any serious changes until they're forced to.